So thank you everyone for coming. Just a reminder, this event will be recorded, so we ask that you please keep your mics muted. However, only the two speakers will be recorded, so you can have your cameras on. Thank you for your cooperation. So there will be time for audience Q&A at the end, and you can submit your questions anonymously on Slido. We'll send the link for that now. You can also click the heart or like button on the side of questions submitted by others that you would like to be asked. I'll be sure to address as many of the questions as possible, but the ones with the likes will definitely get priority, so please check that out. You can look at those at any time during the event, and you can add to that as well. Without further ado, today's guest is David-san. David-san, thank you for coming.
Thanks very much for having me.
来てくれてありがとうございました。
こちらこそありがとうございました。
今週忙しかったですか？
まあ、はい。なんか文句言うほどじゃないけど、まあ、仕事は仕事で、まあ、順調で行っていますけど、まあ、それ以外、普通にダンスしたり、ゲームしたりしましたから、まあ、メレニーさんはい
や、そのことはなかったですけど、そんなに忙しくなかったです。でも、雪を降って本当にびっくりしました。
びっくりしましたね。
早すぎますね。
やっぱりカナダですね。
ですね。
はい。
まあ、時間変更、慣れてきましたか？
楽勝でした。はい、楽勝。全然問題なかった。
よかったです。
私は早起きですから。
ああ、そうなんですか。
そう春になると多分大変になりそうけど。
確かにもっと早くに。私、もう慣れてきました。太陽があって問題ないです。
太陽があって問題ないね。
このようなトークイベントをやったことありますか？
このようなイベントやったことあるけど別の話題でした。
あ、そうなんですか。何のイベントですか？
まあ、日本でいろいろインタビューされたり、トークしたりしましたから、いつも日本語でやっていますけど、でもこれは初めて母語でやるんですから、ちょっと初めて。了
解です。じゃあ、頑張りましょう。
頑張りましょう。
じゃあ、始めましょうね。So, we're going to tell you a little bit about us. That was just to give you a little bit of a taste of some of the things that we have learned while studying Japanese and how you can use it even with non-native speakers. So we'll just do a bit of a short self-introduction, starting with me. So I will share my screen. Can everyone see?
Looks good for me.
Okay, great. So just a bit about me. So my name is Melanie Muir. I am the volunteer coordinator and one of the administrative assistants at the Japan Foundation Toronto. I started this past April, so I'm still relatively new, but so far loving everything about the experience. I have a BA in Psych from Western. And after I graduated from Western, I went on the JET program and was teaching in Japan. So I lived in Matsuyama, which is on Shikoku, kind of a small town by Japan standards, but really large by Canadian ones. So after that, I did the full 5 years on JET. And then after that, I was working at a private school for 2 years at a kindergarten. And then I just moved back this past March. Sorry, technical. Matsuyama, by the way, is a great place. I definitely recommend it for anyone who is visiting the Shikoku area. They have very cute mascots. There's 3 of them now. There was only 1 or 2 when I first moved. There's Komyukyan, Mikyan, and Dark Mikyan. You can see all of the spots within 1 day. There's Doko Onsen, and there's cute little trains that go around. And most famously, there's the Matsuyama Castle, which is one of the few remaining original structures. Most of the castles have been redone at this point for various reasons on the inside. So my hobbies are being active, While I was in Japan, I did carrying mikoshis, and I did kyudo as well. And I love to spoil my dog. And I like to hang out with my friends. So a little bit about my journey learning Japanese. So I started studying when I was in university in my final year, but it was mostly just introduction and the basics. And then once I moved to Japan right after graduating, it was when I really started to focus and study seriously. Around that time, I was introduced to the idea that, yeah, you know, Japanese shows are cool, but English dub is terrible. And I wanted to be able to understand it, or at least enjoy it more in its actual language. So that's kind of what prompted me to start learning in the first place. And then once I moved, it became really about survival. So I thought I had way more Japanese than I actually did. And once I moved, that was very apparent. And the things that I thought I could do, like basic conversation, weren't cutting it in the day-to-day life. So I started doing some private lessons. And my teacher was great. I had her the whole time that I was in Japan. So she really saw me grow from having no Japanese to being fairly competent at Japanese. While I was there, I also did things like the JLPT, the Japanese Language Proficiency Test. And that's what I used to mark my progress a little bit. Because progress was kind of slow, it was hard to gauge where I was. So I found the test helpful to motivate me to keep going, but we'll address that a little bit later. And then once I moved back, it was a very different situation. I wasn't using Japanese every day. And so I needed new outlets. So how was I going to keep it up? I didn't want to lose my skills. So I participate in the JFT language classes at the Japan Foundation Toronto. And I also joined the virtual study space that we have. So I definitely recommend both those things, where I can speak to staff and volunteers in Japanese and just keep up my skills. They don't get too rusty. Yeah. So, and now that I've bored all of you with my life story, let's hear about someone far more interesting. So David-san, could you tell us a little bit about you?
That's not true at all. Hi, everyone. I'm David. This is, I guess, a background for you all, because it's also kind of new for me as well. Melanie and I haven't really talked much. This is kind of a real interview. We've like met for like, I guess, meetings to prepare for this. But whenever I talk with her and everyone else, it's always in Japanese. This is probably the most English I've ever heard come from her mouth since meeting her like once or twice in the past little bit. But it's
different, eh? It's very different hearing you speak English as well.
I know it's different, but it's nice. So let me share my screen now. I got the same thing going here. So you're going to see a lot of like parallelisms here. This is because this is me learning about you, Melanie, just as much as you're learning about me. We both went to Western. I'm a bit of your senpai, but
wow.
We both went to Western. Yeah, I was in mechanical and materials engineering. I was there from 2005 through 2012. I was there for like 7 years or so, 7.5 years, and focused on like a renewable energy. So I have like sort of solar panels here. I can get a little laser pointer going. Did some solar panel stuff and trying to improve the efficiency in that. And I didn't really do a lot of Japanese studying at university, to be honest. But I graduated a normal, bright, doe-eyed student and got my first job. That was a train wreck. They don't prepare you nearly well enough coming out of university for your first job. So I didn't have a good time. So what do you do when you realize that, like, oh my God, I'm going to get stuck in this job and I don't see myself doing this for 20 years. What am I going to do? You run away to Japan. You escape the country and you run away. So I also joined the JET program. I started in 2014. So I think you joined 2015. I think so. We were both in Japan at the exact same time. And I think actually I wanted to say during your presentation, I visited Dogo Onsen.
Did you really?
I did. I was considering about putting a photo in here when I saw your presentation, but I didn't want to be like, no. So I actually visit. I'll send it to you afterwards.
Okay.
Yeah, but it's a great place. Was it Matsu, was it? What's the name of your city again?
Matsuyama.
Matsuyama, thank you. But yeah, I was in Shigaken myself. It's right in the center of the whole country. Again, middle of nowhere. It's got this giant like lake. And I was on the west side there in a small town called Takashima. It's usually where they place you. Really close to Osaka and Kyoto. So I did lots of adventures down there. But I am not a teacher. I did not want to be teaching English. I'm an engineer and I wanted to get back into that. So I joined a Japanese robotics company in 2017, and I was there for 2 years in Osaka. I also got married in that span of period in Japan. So
congratulations.
Yeah, thank you. She's actually American, so she was on the JET program as well. So we met through that. But from there, like my wife wanted to study education at a little higher level, so we actually went to Finland for 2 years and to realize her dream. And while I was out there, I got to go back into my engineering roots and do some stuff with printed electronics, if there are any high-tech people in the audience. And I still work for them today. Like, if anything, the pandemic has allowed me to do that type of thing. I can work remotely anywhere in the world for them. So here I am now in Toronto doing my thing. But I'm more than just a Japanese and tech head. And we're all these weird people. We are very diverse people though too. So we're not just like people who are into anime and Hatsune Miku or cosplay, but I also love D&D. I play this like every week. Got friends that I play with around the world online, and I'm a swing dancer. I like to keep active in that sense too. I've been dancing longer than I've been speaking Japanese actually as well. So yeah, we're all very diverse people. So it's not good to group Japanese speakers as that's what they do. It's no, we actually have a lot of hobbies and likes. But we were also in Japan for like 5 years, and we collect a lot of experiences and memories. And if anyone's thinking about it, please send us a message after this, and we'd love to talk to you about it and what you can gain from going
at length, I'm sure.
Yeah, for the JET program. It's a wonderful opportunity. So, but I'm not here to talk too much about that. I'm here to talk about JET language learning and what we did. So I started my Japanese learning in Toronto at a private school called Aitas, way back in the day when they were first starting. And they did a really good job with immersion teaching. And I got a really good route there. And from there, I did like a trip to Japan, and I really got thrown under the bus there. And we were never ready when we go to Japan the first time. But it was a good experience. And when I was actually in Japan, I didn't just get it for my work and daily life, but that is usually the main source of your study while you're in Japan, if you are ever visiting or living there. But I do strongly encourage you, if you are going to live there, to get a private tutor or have a small group as well. I personally use the Somatome grammar books and reading comprehension books. And that was my favorite to go by. But everyone has their own tools, whatever works for you. Today, I got a few outlets that I tried to keep up with my Japanese learning. I use the JCCC. They got events there. I try to join in whenever I'm free. The JFT for these type of language learning and classes that they have. And then on my own, there's anime, manga, all the sorts of just have that media consumption. There's an app that I've had for like decades now, it feels like, called Emiwa that I've got on iPhone. I'm not sure if it's available for Android or other. Yeah. I really enjoy Emiwa though. If you have the chance to get it, you should try it if you don't already. And the big one is friends. If you have friends who are native or who speak Japanese in the community, it's a very good outlet to keep up your Japanese learning. But let's continue to talk about Japanese learning. How do we do it? So what's done? I'm going to pass it back to you, Melanie.
Great. Well, it's good getting to know you a little bit and not just seeing your face.
Yeah.
So I didn't know you were a swing dancer. That's very cool.
Yeah, they got a really big community here, or they did until the pandemic hit. But we're trying to—
same with everything, right?
Yeah, we're trying to rebuild it.
Great. Well, so I do have some questions for you. So I really want to make this an interactive experience between the two of us. So don't feel like I'm just quizzing you.
No,
feel free to ask me anything back. We can have a bit of a chat about it. So the first question I have for you is, we heard about why you studied it originally, but why do you still study Japanese?
Yeah. Still study is the underlying thing here. I think I heard you say it during one of your presentations as well. And I guess being fully open here, open book, there's no tate mae going on here. It's all like, I'm going to show you my honshin. This is full hone exposure. I still study because I don't want to lose what I've learned. It's a sense of pride, honestly, that I've come this far, that I've been able to learn so much. And that phrase that, like, if you don't use it, you lose it. It's true. There was a point in Finland I couldn't use it for like almost 2 years, it felt like, and it feels like it was really dragging my level down, and it's kind of, scary in that sense. So I still study to maintain an ability that I put a lot of time and effort into. How about you? Because you said the same thing.
Hearing you say that, I feel pretty much the exact same way. Even just, I moved back here at the end of March, and the difference in the last 6 or 7 months in my Japanese compared to what it was just before I moved is completely different.
Yeah.
So I've really had to step up my game, especially lately, where I felt it kind of slipping away.
It's kind of like jarring or jolting almost. It's like
exactly
when you're learning here in Toronto, it's nice and you can go at a good pace when you're beginning, but then when you get to Japan, it's like you all of a sudden hit like the highway and you're going really fast, and then when you get off the highway, you realize, oh, it's you're still driving, you're still moving, but it's not nearly as intense.
And it's a lot less autopilot, right? You have to actively study while you're here. Whereas, if I didn't study for a week or two in Japan, it wasn't as big of a deal.
That's right.
But yeah, so like you, use it or lose it. I really do want to keep up everything that I've worked for. And I also find it just kind of satisfying. Like when you finally start to understand something that you've been working on, it's so satisfying to be like, okay, I'm not an idiot. I get it.
or you hear something in anime, you're like, I literally just learned that word yesterday.
Like, I know that one.
I know that now. Saying. Yes, thank you. It is kind of satisfying. Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah. So yeah, I think in a way it's a hard question, but at the same time it's an easy one in the sense of, if you don't use it, you will lose it. So
yeah,
to keep it up, and no matter what level you are, right? Even if you're
True.
just starting out. So yeah, okay. So my next question for you is, how do you stay motivated? What do you do to stay motivated?
Well, it's always easier to be motivated when it's something you enjoy doing.
Definitely.
Yeah, we can't hide it. We're anime nerds. I'm an anime nerd, at least. I've always loved anime, and it's probably what got me into Japanese in the first place. And being able to continue to watch that and enjoy that, it's easy to be motivated to want to understand it and follow along with all the different, I don't know, talking points that they get into, and the new sci-fi stuff versus fantasy stuff. It's always new and different than just talking about the weather every day.
So what do you do when that motivation drops? Because like you, I had an interest in Japanese originally from watching shows and things, but you can't sustain that interest for forever, right? So when it wanes, what do you do?
That's the challenge, isn't it? And I'm sure you experienced the same thing. I know motivation drops, and it will drop for you. It drops for everyone. And at first, I guess, especially after I left Japan, it was kind of hard and worrisome, because you do feel like if I don't do something now, I'm going to lose it. But I've learned over time that it doesn't decay as quickly as you might think. And
that's reassuring.
It is, yeah, and especially because I've been in Finland even for 2 years, and then I don't use Japanese out there at all. It's only on my own time. So coming back to Toronto and being able to use it and getting back into the groove of things, it does sort of feel like it decays, but not so much that you should worry about your motivation dropping too much. I guess what I'm getting at is, don't stress over it dropping. But if you start waiting, I don't know, a weeks to turning into months of not doing anything about it, well, then maybe you need to start asking yourself, what is my motivation to learn this or progress with this?
It's a tough question to address with
Yeah, it
yourself.
is. But like, it's one of those things, like I'm doing other things with my life. Do I want to replace those other things with more Japanese study? And, sometimes people will say yes, sometimes people will say no. And I like the level that I have right now. But when it drops, actually answering the question though, have other people keep you responsible, keep you engaged, keep you, what's the word I'm looking for? Held accountable. That's the word. Because if you're doing it alone, well, then you can just sort of skip a lesson or a study day. But if you're like, I'm meeting this person to study, or I have a class this week, you don't have a choice. Your motivation is sort of put into you because you have to go and realize that commitment.
For sure, yeah.
Anything to add on to that? I don't know if you.
Yeah, I was listening to you talk, and I'm like, wow, no, we have very similar opinions about a lot of these
Went to the
things.
same school, same same jet program.
But
Yeah.
that being said, I find that um, being kind to myself when my motivation drops is really the best thing that I can do. And having realistic and achievable goals,
Sure.
like
Yeah.
even if they're very small ones of, okay, well, I'm going to learn 5 new words in the next 2 weeks. And I'm going to figure out how to use these 2 grammar points and what they actually mean.
This kanji mastered by the end of the week.
Well, because sometimes you'll study the same thing over and over again and
Yeah.
it just doesn't stick.
Yeah.
So in cases like that, instead of trying to get so frustrated with myself, I try to be a little bit more lenient and like, okay, for the next couple of weeks, we're just going to scale it back. And sometimes that even just is watching a show. Like YouTube and Netflix have a language plugin that you can put on. So instead of having English subtitles, you can put the Japanese.
Yeah.
And then when you're watching, you can pause it and just hover over a word to figure out what it means. So I found that when I really don't want to do anything, but I feel guilty for not doing anything, stuff like that is really, really helpful.
No, that's a good point. I didn't know about that plugin you can get to have Japanese subtitles. I gotta check that out.
Yeah, I think you can just download it. It's all free. So
yeah, I figured if it's YouTube. So
yeah, so YouTube and Netflix both have one. They're slightly different. I think the Netflix one is a little bit better, but yeah, they do in a pinch,
Sure, yeah, that's great.
So were there any stumbling blocks on your journey to study Japanese? And how did you overcome those blocks if they did exist?
Let's do one at a time here. Like stumbling blocks, again, you're probably with me. Tons of them all the time, every time. First you get them when you're first learning and you're like, well, I feel like I'm like, I can't express myself. And how do you learn to express yourself? And then you get to Japan and you're like, well, I still can't express myself. And now I have to keep up with, regular conversations. And now that we're back in Toronto, my stumbling block is how do I maintain my ability when I can't go out and just have a conversation or like at the convenience store saying like, yeah, I want this onigiri. It's usually that simple, like when you're actually in the country. But stumbling blocks, yeah, constantly. How did I overcome them? Right now, exposure is a big thing for me, especially being outside of Japan. You need to increase your exposure to Japanese in order to force yourself to keep up with the language. And so you're learning without even learning, knowing that you're learning, I guess. So like turning off subtitles in anime is a big one. I guess, yeah, this app that you just, or this plugin that you just said, that seems like a great idea for me to try as well. But like, you could even technically go so far as like changing your computer settings to be only in Japanese. And I've heard of people who did that. I'm not doing it myself, but like you have to put it in your everyday life and force yourself to use it, even though it's not, in Japan talking with them.
It's an interesting idea of just getting creative with the idea of studying. Like, what is studying? Does it have to be going through a textbook? Does it have to be flashcards? It doesn't, right? It can be anything. Like you said, you could change the computer settings or play a game, listen to some music.
Yeah,
if it's in another language,
that's a great one. Play your Steam
trying
game.
to do it.
in like Japanese like voices and subtitles. You can do that.
Yeah, getting creative is definitely good for trying to get out of, you get in a rut so easily. And if you're already struggling and you're in a rut, it's so difficult to get yourself out of it. So creativity, I think, is a great idea for that.
Yeah, I'm sure there's other stumbling blocks though, but the biggest one I think for at least right now is exposure. Um, it's never going to be the same pace of actually living in the country. So yeah, exposure is the best thing I can really say for overcoming those.
No, that's a great idea. I didn't think about that at all. I'm still very much getting used to of,
Yeah,
it's
we
not
came
in my
back.
daily life. What do I do?
We also came back around the same time too, eh? I think you said March. I got back in April this year, so yeah, we're
very
both
similar lives going on.
we're trying to pick up at the same time. So I'm interested to hear what else you find.
Yeah, well, for me, a huge stumbling block, and I'm sure someone else can relate to it, is I use the JLPT to measure where I am and how I'm doing. And the first time I took the N2, I failed it. And it crushed me, absolutely crushed me, especially since the people that I study with, who theoretically have the same ability as me, passed.
Oh, that's the worst.
It was. So I had to go through, I had a crisis of self a little bit, and I had to go through of, okay, how much is this? It's a 4-hour test. It's fairly tiring. How much of it is the test itself? And how much of it is I don't understand the material? So once I figured that out, I worked with my teacher, my Japanese language teacher, which definitely having a class, a regularly scheduled thing that you have to go to and use the language and use things that you wouldn't, because even when we were living there, you use the same kinds of phrases all the time. So in language classes here or there, you can use things that you don't normally use, and that can really test your ability. So in those classes, her and I really worked on, okay, I don't understand this. What do I do? And going through things more in depth.
Yeah.
And I took, in Japan, you can take the test every 6 months.
Yes, that was a good thing about the.
But I waited the full year from the first time I failed. And then I was passed. I passed and it was fine. But it took me longer than I had expected. And so that really threw me to be like, okay.
You do know like the JLPTs are an exponential increase in difficulty, right?
But knowing that and feeling it are not the same thing.
Yeah. I won't tell you how many times I had to take it, but it was more than once.
Well, that makes me feel better.
Yeah, it was a lot of times.
It does get hard, right? And especially since that had been what I was using almost exclusively to measure myself. So I really have to figure out what to do from that.
Without getting too much into the JLPT now, like I do have some thoughts on it because it is a means of marking your level and like sort of gauging your abilities. But I think it has its flaws as well because it's just another test that you do.
And it's only written
on paper.
There's no
speaking.
It's a Scantron sheet. There's listening and things like that. There's no speaking. There's no writing from you, like having to make sentences kind of thing.
I know people who are like N2 level, but can't pass the N4 or N3 just because they can't take the test because they're so good at communicating. They don't need to take the test to prove it. So I don't.
Well, it's true that, and it's totally different skill set. The reading and writing and the speaking and listening, completely different skill sets. And I'm sure you're similar. And I was much better at the listening than I ever was at the reading.
Oh yeah.
Particularly because of how I learned Japanese for the most part. But even to this day, it takes me a really long time to message the teachers back at the JFT because writing is not my strong suit. So I guess we'll move on to the next question here. So what do you think is the best thing about studying Japanese?
The best thing? Is this about studying Japanese or just Japanese in general?
Up to your interpretation.
Okay. Studying Japanese, I'd say, I kind of like the kanji writing. It's kind of got a zen if you do it properly with, calligraphy style and all that stuff. And it looks really nice if you do it like actually on calligraphy and all that. So you're practicing the kanji at the same time as making art technically. And I think that's pretty satisfying. Japanese in general, the best thing about it, I think it's because it's such a unique language, and you can, like, not many people outside of Japan learn to speak it. It's pretty cool. Not only just like because you're in a niche group, because like you can speak with other foreigners who can speak Japanese, but at the same time natives. It's also like kind of eye-opening in the sense that like the language is, you think backwards in it. At least I do. I don't know about you, but it's kind of, you have to learn to think differently, and so it teaches you to think differently, like in a whole new way. And I kind of like that about it. It's not like every day that you can teach an English speaker to think backwards and all that. So I thought that was pretty cool. How about you? Like, did you have anything that you really enjoyed about studying?
Yeah, I agree with you in the sense of it changes how you think about language, because English, it is almost the complete opposite sentence structure wise. So trying to figure out how to say something, especially when you can't directly translate it, is a kind of interesting but difficult task. And that leads me into my answer, which would be the nuance of everything. So when you're learning Japanese or a language in general, but in this case, Japanese, each word has a bit of a nuance to it.
Yes.
And some of those nuances are connected to parts of a culture or things geographically related and so on. So sometimes in order to really know how to use that word or grammar point or whatever it is, you have to know something about the culture. So in some cases, it's inspired me to learn more, like research a bit of the history, or sometimes the geography of Japan is relevant for it. And just like understand the country a little bit better as a whole. And I find that really cool.
Yeah, I like that. It definitely is well, most languages, Japan or Japanese especially, because it has all the kanji, they are historical kind of like records of the country and culture and all that, like Chinese, Japanese, and I'm sure even for other Asian and middle and like European languages as well. It's just something when you're learning. I have never learned another language other than, I guess, French, being Canadian, and Japanese. But this is the first time I chose to learn the language, and that really sort of opened up that door to the history as well, and you can start to connect those things. So we never really did that with French going through school.
No, it was just kind of a mandatory subject, right?
Exactly. So having that sort of opening and that connection there, and they make it very apparent and obvious for you, really helped with learning Japanese and encouraging to continue with it.
Yeah, I find Japanese a lot more interesting than I found French when I was in school. I don't know if it's just, I'm terrible with languages, so I was surprised I studied Japanese at all. But I struggled with French, and I don't know if it's because I didn't know much about it outside of the classroom, but Japanese was much more relevant to my life in a weird way because of the music or the shows I was watching or the friends that I made. Some of my friends did exchanges and things, and it just became way more of a living, breathing thing than French ever was, and it really did encourage me to learn the language more.
Nice.
So next question. So what does the Japanese language mean to you?
Oh, that's a big one. What does it mean to me? See, when I think of the Japanese, or just like speaking Japanese, it's kind of turned into like an identity that I really associate with. It's I guess you were kind of mentioning it before, like if you lose it, you're kind of like, who am I? It's kind of like a crisis. Like I know I'll eventually, if I do, heaven forbid, like lose my abilities, I know like I'll eventually overcome that and continue with life. But right now, it does feel like it is part of my identity, just because of all the effort we put into it, and all the experiences we've made with it, and all the friends we've made, and all that. So it does have like a certain power in my life that I can, I guess, wield.
I would agree with that entirely. Yeah, I have so many memories attached to, weirdly enough, certain phrases or things like that, because someone taught me that phrase, or there was a funny experience with that, or and it's become part of my identity now, is the fact that I can speak Japanese to whatever degree that is. And I've made friends through it, both in Japan and then back in Toronto. It's enabled me to talk to some of the staff more better and things. And it's just, not having it, I would be like, who am I? Even though I don't use it all the time. But
you said something that kind of like got me like thinking of a tangent, like certain phrases that people teach you and that you like, just like, oh, that's great, that's really cool. I kind of wish I could do that more often with just people around the city with English, just because there's some things you can express in Japanese that you can't express in English. Not the same way, at least. It's different feelings and nuances, like you said before, that just make up it. So,
and something will happen, you just want to be like, shogunai. I don't know. It can't be helped. Doesn't really cover the same feeling, you know. So yeah, it's an interesting experience in that term. So when did you notice that you felt that way about it? When did you notice that it was so important to you?
It wasn't when I was learning in Toronto. I unfortunately, it was actually, it must have been after I got to Japan. It's only recently, I guess, in the sense that like I feel like I actually have this skill that I've gained, and you can only realize that you feel this way after you've gotten that skill. So it had to have been, I guess, during my time in Japan at some point when you had to use it. And like I lived on my own for 2 years and without the support of the JET program. So that's kind of like this language, this culture, this connection is part of me now. So I guess it happens when you're there, if you happen to go there.
It's interesting because for me, it was definitely when I came back.
Oh.
It wasn't until I was back in Toronto, and I guess that it wasn't part of my daily life anymore, that I realized how much it mattered to me. And at first I didn't notice, but then once I started making some friends, like, you know, some exchange students or some STEM staff at work, and then I noticed that I could use my Japanese here to make friends and connections and memories. And that's when it really hit me of, oh, okay. It has multiple uses and it's still relevant to my life.
And it means a lot to you as well. You realize that it's sort of like it becomes taisetsu. I just want to
exactly. So I have another question for you.
How are we doing on time? We still good?
We're okay on time.
All right.
So probably last one, and then I'll go to the audience questions. So how do you want to work with or use Japanese in the future?
You know, I haven't really been able to answer that yet. I don't know. Like I wish that I could sort of, if not work directly for a Japanese company, then at least have my company with business relations to Japan, because that would enable me to, you know, travel there and actually use it with people and improve as well, because you're doing it in a business setting where, you know, get to go into the high level of keigo and all that fun stuff. Yeah, I'm trying to get better at it. It's a mess still, but
there's so many more rules for anything polite, right?
The problem is I start mixing keigo with the other polite stuff, and there's some things like, oh, that sounds
the humble form, right?
Yeah,
and then you can't say that together, but if you change the particle, then you can, and it's
So I'm still learning that too, but I'd love to work with a Japanese business to be able to, you know, grow into that space. But other than that, I don't see myself becoming a translator. I know 1.5 million translators already who are looking for work, and I'm just not nearly as good as them. And I don't I don't want to try to be as good as them. So hopefully stay within my own realm of like skills with engineering, but, you know, use it in Japan if I could. How about you? Like, I guess you're using it right now. So
yeah, I mean, I use it at work a lot, actually.
I can imagine. I'm kind of jealous. You get to use it every day.
Yep. That part is really great about where I work at the moment. So I think In terms of the future, I haven't really decided yet either. I'm kind of with you of it'd be great to do something in my realm of skills, but I'm also open to just whatever kind of comes up, because if I've learned nothing else, it's got to be flexible with anything relating to Japanese. So
yeah, keep your expectations tempered and all that.
Tempered and realistic, but also still have hope.
You can never lose hope. I agree.
So I think we should get to some audience questions.
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay, so what study methods do you think have been the most effective?
Most effective for me, well, I'll start off with everyone is different, unfortunately, and I'm sure you've heard that phrase a lot in the JET program. Every situation is different, or whatever it is, and every person is different. Some people might be better learning through media like manga and anime. Others need to sit down and actually set time aside for studying. For me specifically, if I want to get better, I need to set aside time devoted specifically for studying. I need to say, I'm going to practice this grammar point today, and I do it for half an hour or an hour. And yeah, I guess anime and manga is good to maintain your ability of where it's at, but it's not really a study method, for me at least. It's kind of maintaining where I'm at without really learning anything new. I don't know about you though, Melanie.
I think it kind of depends on what I'm watching in that case, because if it is something that I don't know a lot about, I could learn a lot of new vocabulary that way.
Okay, yeah, that's true. Yeah.
But for me, I'm kind of old school in the sense of flashcards that I have handwritten.
Okay.
Or if I don't physically write it, I'm never going to remember it. And I don't know why, but
now that you say that, I'm going to add to that review. If I study something this week, I'm going to look at it again next week, and then look at it again 2 weeks later from that next week, just extending the time between them. Yeah. So like but that review time, saying I still know what that means, I still know how to write it, that means it's sunk in.
For sure.
So review is a good point as well.
There's also a bunch of like phone apps that you can read the news on. Like there's Todai, which is divided by level, and it breaks down. You can do different themes and subjects that interest you, or there's podcasts that you can listen to that about different subjects, or even now there's Instagram. There's different Instagram accounts, and they just teach you like phrases or be careful of this mistake or things like that, which is interesting.
Yeah. One more thing I guess I can add to that. The best study methods for effectivity, I guess, is when you actually are talking to someone, ideally face to face. If you are out there creating content from your own ideas and mouth and listening and reacting to that, you can't get any better studying or improvement, I guess, in that sense.
That's a good point. Yeah.
Yeah, and there's a couple apps that you said that you could probably use. I think one of the newer ones that I saw was Tandem. There was another one I used years ago, but I don't know if it's still being run or not. If you wanted to sort of do something simple on the bus as well, Duolingo does have some stuff as well. I used that for a little bit when I just wanted to maintain what I had in Finland. But I didn't learn many new things from it. It was more of a maintaining thing.
I think there's also, I think it's called Memrise, is pretty good.
I've heard of that. I haven't actually tried it.
Memrise, and there's Boonpo as well. They're different, just different apps that you can try. I think there's the option of doing like a flashcard version of it, or I think you can choose if it's like you want to study kanji or you want to study vocab, but it's mostly those two things.
Have you tried it?
I have. It's been a while, and I don't really remember because I was doing it with friends, so it wasn't on.
But it's there.
It's there.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. So next question: what study materials specifically do you recommend when approaching the JLPT?
Ooh. So I do have an answer for that, but I don't know if it's very easily obtainable because I have tried to look for it even here in Toronto. There's all these what's the English? Mondai shoes, a collection of questions in a textbook that you use for literally studying for the JLPT. Those, just doing them, I don't know if you want to do it every day or every week or whatnot, but those were actually very useful because it's virtually the same thing of what you see on the JLPT. The problem is that I haven't seen them. They're not really sold in Canada, and the vendors, that the Canadian vendors don't sell exactly the material that I'm thinking of. And I would usually have to find other ways of sending them to my friends in Japan and then having them ship those books over to me here in Canada, because you can buy them in like Japanese Amazon and all that.
So strange that you can't just use Canadian Amazon to do it.
I know. I don't understand that.
I think that you mentioned it earlier, the Nihongo Somatome.
Yes.
Was it?
Yeah.
I think that those also have very, very small, but like mini practice tests in them after each chapter. And they have them at the end that are similar to the format of the JLPT, I think. They do. Yes. So it's not as comprehensive as those books that you were mentioning, but it's something to keep you going. It's a way to practice what you just learned in the book itself. Without having to go out and buy different texts for every, like, there's a textbook for reading, there's a textbook for kanji. It gets expensive. It gets real expensive. It's at least $20, and then you need one for the 4 skills. And I could though recommend that if you're going to get one, the reading one's the best, because you can do your kanji practice in there, you do your grammar practice in there, and then you're doing your reading comprehension and actually answering questions. So that kind of a good suggestion. Covers it all, in my opinion. Mm-hmm. Yeah, you definitely need a separate one for listening, because it's not covered anywhere else. Honestly, my listening is just me watching anime. I can't lie. At least you're honest. I know. I didn't do any listening practice for any of the JLPTs I took. I don't know how you passed. A lot of just talking to like coworkers and everything. I was in an elementary school, so there was no English at all when I was working, so it helped a lot. I think if you were to take it now, you might want to brush up a little bit. Oh God, I will never take. No. I'm done with the JLPT. I'm good. So next one, we're still good on time. All right. Okay, so what advice would you give to someone who's learning primarily outside of Japan to get to N2 level? I think we've mentioned a lot of things through our conversations. What we just said in the last question, I strongly would recommend. But the biggest advice I'd say is classes, either whether it be a group class or a personal tutor. You get the furthest progress when you have one-on-one time and you actually can ask direct questions and you're forced to do outputs. You need to have some sort of... Sometimes you don't know what you don't know until you're trying to use it. Exactly. Having the feedback is really key to leveling up really quickly. Yeah, I would agree. I'm going to do a bit of shameless self-promo here, but the JFT actually does have a lot of really great resources. One of them being classes. Yeah. And some of them we have free resources as well on our website, which we'll do a link for later. But just to, help you navigate studying a little bit, of like direct you. But yeah, I think classes, and as much as it's not fun, textbooks are really important for the JLPT. Yeah, I agree. Because the test is not intuitive. No. It is material based. So definitely the textbooks, and then the one-on-one or the group classes, you can just touch base a little bit and figure out things. And what you said before as well about like, expectations, it just be prepared for maybe not passing a test, and be okay with that. It was a learning experience taking the test, and maybe next time it'll be better. Honestly, sometimes one year will be really difficult and the other year will be really easy. It's just luck of the draw if you got the bad year or something. They used to do that, I noticed, because I would sometimes take it in the summer and then in the winter. And if they had too many people pass in the summer, they make it harder. The winter was really hard. And if they didn't have enough people pass in the summer, the winter was really easy. Yeah. So it, like you said, it really is. Each test is very different, and hope you got the easy one. I think we have time for at least one or two more. So, sure. Are there any particular Japanese media that are better for learning the language, in your opinion?
I would say it depends on what you're trying to learn and depends on your level as well. Strongly depends on your level. If you're like N2, N1 level, you got to be reading newspapers. If you are, if yeah, and at high level again, you want to be like listening to podcasts and watching, I guess, like variety shows in Japanese. That's whatever's on YouTube, or if you can get an actual, I don't know how you would get the actual full shows, but that's high level stuff. Lower level stuff, anime always helps. Even having subtitles on, it helps. But this is all like input stuff. It's always difficult for me to suggest outputs because you need to do that with someone to get the feedback.
I think it kind of depends on which type of output. If you're just practicing like pronunciation or speaking or getting a natural flow, you could do something like shadowing by yourself.
Yes, that's true.
But you're right. If you're trying to learn if you've made a sentence, how does it rank in terms of being able to be understood?
Comprehension.
You definitely need the feedback from someone.
Yeah, but I don't know if there's expectation with this question of like, oh, manga is better or anime is better, or like this app is better than that app. I don't know if I can answer that directly because different learners have different preferences. But what worked best for me was watching a lot of TV, whether it be anime or variety shows or news, and then talking as much as you can.
Mm-hmm. I think it has to be related to what you find interesting.
Yes.
So if you're trying to do it, if you're trying to study via some sort of media, if you're not interested in it, you're not learning anything. So
I agree.
If you're going to do the non-traditional textbook method, then
find motivation.
You need to care. Yeah,
you need to care
about what the subject is. Because if you don't, then nothing's going to be absorbed. So I think you have to kind of play around a little bit and find out. There's so many apps, there's so many channels on YouTube and Instagram and podcasts and things, and just figure out what works with you and works for you personally, I think.
Agreed. Yeah.
I think we have time for one more question.
Kind of talked about the JLPT. Should we go for it or?
Okay, well, briefly, what would you say the benefits are?
To be completely honest, the only benefits I see for the JLPT, and this is a personal opinion, is to put it on your resume.
Yes.
There's no other reason I can see you taking JLPT. Well, I guess if you want to, like you were doing, like if you want to set yourself a goal, that could be a personal reason. But for me, I didn't really learn that way. It was strictly for resume. And that way, like companies in Japan will look at you and say, you know what, I can actually give this person an interview because they can understand me now. So what do you think though?
I agree with you in terms of, it's really helpful in the resume. And if you are trying to do anything with a Japanese company, they usually require a certain level of JLPT fluency. That being said, I also think it's useful as a measuring tool, especially in like 5, 4, and 3. I would say are pretty good at measuring. Once you get to 2 and 1, there's not a whole lot of difference in terms of what I would say fluency. Like to me, being able to pass the 1 is more about how academic you are, how academic you study, because just even the themes that are on the test is just a little bit harder. But I think it can still be a useful goal and a useful motivation to study, even if you're not really trying with like, I have to have all of them. I have to have all the levels. It can just be something like, I do need to study. I do need to study because I do have a test coming up. Sometimes that's all the motivation you need.
Yeah.
And I just see one question here that I think is kind of interesting.
Sure. So, let's just try to hammer through it.
When you gain a certain level of fluency, what do you do to improve the accuracy intentionally when speaking?
I notice it after I say it, unfortunately. So my mind is a little bit lagging behind my mouth. So I will correct myself while I'm speaking. I've never actually asked a native speaker if that is more confusing for them or if it's harder to understand me, if I should just let myself, keep going or not.
I think it depends on how far off you were the first time.
Yeah, I'm not usually that far off. Sometimes I'll be like, oh, I should have done that in past tense, or oh, I forgot to conjugate or put a da in there when there should be a da in there, like in between, like I'm nitpicky like that though. And I'm sure they don't care. They might not even hear it because just like English, we cut so many grammar points and words that when we're speaking, we don't even realize it. They do the same thing in Japanese, I've realized. So when you gain it, what do you do to improve the accuracy intentionally when speaking? Accuracy I can't really answer, but I intentionally try when I've reached a certain level, I've tried to say I'm going to use this word or I'm going to use this grammar point in this situation and try to force it out, even if it's a little bit bimyo, a little bit off. But accuracy, I think my previous answer is the best I can say. I just correct myself while I'm talking. And I don't know if it's good.
I can't answer to whether or not it's good. I think
Yeah.
it very much depends on the situation. Sometimes correcting it helps, and I think other times it probably makes it more confusing. But I think that you have a good answer with that. Of sometimes you don't know how accurate you are until after you've said something.
Yeah, regardless of your ability.
In terms of like actual speaking, like your intonation or your pacing things, like you mentioned earlier, the feedback from if you're taking a class or a teacher, and also just I've heard that shadowing, and in my own experience as well, shadowing has been the most effective of like, I think that I'm going a good pace or that I'm doing it correctly, and then I copy what it should be, and sometimes I'm very off. And intonation as well, sometimes just practicing the basics of like the a, I, U, E, O, and just trying to get those sounds correct every now and then re-saying what you were trying to say makes it a little bit clearer.
Especially as English speakers, our sounds are sort of mix into like what English sounds like, but then when you go back to Japanese, it's going to sound, like a foreigner speaking Japanese.
Which is the last thing anyone who's trying to learn the language wants.
Yeah, I do not want to sound like that, but it happens. So
yeah, but definitely just like practicing and being critical of yourself, but still kind, like not mean to yourself about it. And just having little critiques that you can fix, I think are probably helpful for that.
Very good point.
So we are out of time. David-san, thank you so much for joining us today. I know I had a lot of questions for you, but it was really great speaking with you, and I appreciate your attendance here.
Yeah, I had a lot of fun, and hopefully, it was nice sharing these experiences with you who've been through virtually the same life as I have.
The same and yet different in some fundamental ways.
So hopefully people got something out of this.
I enjoyed it, if nothing else. So there you go. So thank you everyone for coming. I hope that you enjoyed tonight's Senpai Talk. If you have time, please fill out a questionnaire. We've put it on the screen there for you, and we've sent it in the chat as well. It just gives us a chance to hear your feedback, and so we can change events and plan future events accordingly. Also, we have some links to some free resources on our website, as well as our classes, which we have promoted, and I can't stress enough, they really do help in terms of learning the language. And there's the classes, the free resources, and also a link to our virtual study space. So that is an area where you can join other learners of Japanese, study together. There's sometimes a teacher in the space. You can ask questions, do events in Japanese, speak with volunteers who are native speakers. So we definitely recommend checking that out. Other than that, thank you so much for coming. I hope you have a wonderful evening and a great weekend. Oh, and also the virtual study space is free, just a reminder. So yeah, enjoy your evening. Thank you so much, and take care. Thanks very much.